Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have a German bomb. In August of 2015, construction workers in East London found something that I don't think anyone was expecting when they unearthed an unexploded 500-pound German from World War II that, if detonated, could easily destroy the surrounding homes and buildings. Yeah, not terrifying at all, right? Of course, the site was immediately blocked off and 700 people ended up being evacuated until things could return to normal safely. The British Army's Royal Logistics Corps Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit took 24 terrifying hours to make the device safe, which thankfully they were able to do without incident. It is thought that there are likely many more of these scary undetonated bombs around because they are the result of bombs that were dropped but that failed to go off. Some didn't go off and won't ever because they were made in error, but most of them just had simple technical difficulties that now, if mishandled, could cause the bomb to detonate. It's all terrifying, but thankfully this one didn't go on to do any harm. And our number 9 spot today we have a war rationing book. When the United States entered the Second World War in late 1941, everyone had to work together to make the most out of the resources they had, which were scarce. Americans who weren't going off to war still had sacrifices to make. Although they weren't putting their lives on the line, they needed to make adjustments so that the troops who were putting their lives on the line would have everything that they needed. This meant rations, as can be seen in the war ration books, which are relics from a horrible time. Each family at the time would be issued these war rationing books, and each stamp would allow for the purchase of rationed goods, but it would be the quantity and time designated. This isn't the scariest thing in the entire world, but it is a very haunting reminder of a dark time in the past. For many of us, we have never had to live through something like that, and I can't imagine how stressful of a time that would be, not only for this, but of course for many reasons. In our number 8 spot today we have a cake. Just recently, in the ruins of a German house that was destroyed in March of 1942, researchers discovered a charred but intact cake. It definitely doesn't look appetizing now, as this cake was burned to a crisp. The artifact, despite being shrunk from heat and charred, is quite preserved, so much so that the swirls of icing that the baker placed on top are still clearly visible. The cake was found in the basement of a home that collapsed following an attack that was carried out by the British Royal Air Force as a retaliation for the 1940 that was carried out by the Germans on the English city of Coventry. This not only reminds us of the horrible time that was World War II, but it is also a reminder of how these attacks were carried out on unsuspecting people in their own homes. This wasn't just the reality this one time, that was the reality all over the world. Because the attack that destroyed this home happened on Saturday, March 28th of that year, it is thought that the home's owner, Johann Worm, who was a local merchant, might have been preparing for a celebration commemorating Palm Sunday. This is just one small example of the realities of war, especially one that has the magnitude of World War II. In our number 7 spot today we have the Gustav guns. During World War II, Adolf was eager to invade France but was unable to because of a real physical barrier that was called the Maginot Line, which was what was standing between him and the rest of Western Europe. Because of his impatience and desire to do evil, he demanded that a new weapon be created that would be able to easily pierce the concrete. In 1941, after France fell, a German steelmaker and arms manufacturer, Frederick Krupp AG, began building what is known as the Gustav gun. It was a 4-story tall, 155-foot long gun that weighed 1,350 tons, and it shot 10,000-pound shells from its 98-foot barrel. Like, that is absolutely insane, and there is simply no reason for anyone, let alone one of the worst people to have ever lived, to need this kind of a weapon. While the sheer size of this thing obviously helped a lot with its insane power, it's also what led to its downfall. The gun, of course, could only be transferred by rail, because imagine trying to put that thing on a plane. Physics says absolutely not. This left it out in the open, and it was an easy target for the Allied bombers flying overhead, which left the project being scrapped within a year. Now the different models that were made and what is left of them is all that remains for this terrifying creation. In our number 5 spot today we have the backyard discovery. When I read this story, I was definitely concerned, but it also made me laugh so much. Many of us can understand that uncomfortable feeling of having an issue but not wanting to bother anyone else about it until the time is right. Sometimes this is just instinct, sometimes this is just politeness, and sometimes you absolutely need to say screw politeness and bother someone because it's an emergency. Nearing the end of 2017, someone in East Poland was digging in their backyard when they accidentally unearthed an unexploded grenade grenade that dates all the way back to World War II. Because it was around the holidays, he didn't want to disturb anyone who might be enjoying time and food with their families, so instead of calling the police, he put it in a bucket filled with sand and placed it in his shed until after the holidays were over. Once the proper people were informed, the area where he found the explosive was examined, where more dangerous objects were also found. In the end, military personnel came by to take care of and properly and securely destroy these dangerous findings. In our number 4 spot today, we have rocket-propelled mortar shells. While crews were just doing their job, casually clearing up the roadside ditches in northeast Poland, they made a shocking discovery. They uncovered what appeared to be 2 unexploded explosive devices. After experts were called in and further research was done, these 2 items turned out to be German 28cm Nebelwerfer shells. Specialists were then able to come and secure the site and the weapons so that they could be taken away for a scheduled detonation, which occurred the following day. The weapons are rocket-propelled mortar shells that were used with a weapon that would fire them in groups of 6, with their maximum range being around 2,200 meters. In our number 3 spot today, we have a grave. In March of 2018, archaeologists in West Poland made a dark discovery when they found a grave that contained the remains of German soldiers that dates back to the Second World War. To make this discovery even more grim, the soldiers were all bound with a blue cord. According to experts, the remains are from 1945, and while the cord looks extremely eerie, they explained that it was likely just used to transport them to the place of burial. According to archaeofeed.com, quote, along with the remains, researchers of the Pomost Association, who initially found archived documents that led to the discovery of the grave, discovered parts of military uniforms, buttons, and German soldier tags. The researchers did not find any marks that would indicate execution of the soldiers. One of the individuals had his legs broken in a few places. According to archaeologists, the soldiers died in battle, and then they would have later been transported to this spot. In our number 2 spot today, we have the crash site. During a 2-month-long excavation that was done by a team of soldiers, sailors, and airmen, as well as civilians, they were able to recover and retrieve some human remains that might belong to the long-lost American air crews of World War II airplanes. The team worked near an island which, during the war, was the site of a Japanese submarine base and a seaplane ramp. This area was the target of a ton of B-24 bombings and raids by the United States in 1944 and 1945. The team sifted through the sand in the area using large baskets in order to search for the remains. Now that they've located the remains, what happens next? Well, the remains will be analyzed to see if they match the profile of any of the missing service members that are associated with that crash site. If so, then their surviving next of kin will be notified. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Chuck Lagoon. This lagoon was the site of one of the main bases for Japan during the war, but in 1944 the United States launched an attack on it. During this, 60 ships were sunk, around 250 planes were brought down. It is likely that researchers knew about the significance of this area, but we didn't really get a good look at it for some 70 years. A photographer who goes by the name of Super Jolly went down into this less than jolly area to snap photos of everything that can be seen down there. He called this shoot one of the scariest dives he's ever done in his life, and I can completely understand why. The area is filled with human skulls, gas masks, and bullets, and many of the artifacts down here are extremely well preserved, which is great for research, but also just so haunting. This area most definitely serves as a haunting reminder of the realities of a world war.
Alright, coming in at number 10 we have the glass jar. As we know, the Americans, with the support from the Allies, dropped the horrifying atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The attacks killed over 200,000 people horribly, and the cities were absolutely decimated. Imagine how fragile human flesh is when it comes to heat, and then imagine how hot something would need to be to melt glass. Hot, right? Have a look at this glass jar found in the Hiroshima aftermath. It seems that heat of approximately 1,500 degrees centigrade, 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, is required to produce this level of deformity. Scientific examination showed that a virtually instantaneous heat wave struck this object and passed as quickly as it had arrived. Basically, the jar resumed its solidified form without leaving stress marks. The flash heat incinerated many people on the spot too, which is absolutely horrible, and this jar just goes to show how hot it really was. Always my thoughts going out to the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, many years later. Coming into number 9, we have The Pilot. This portrait of a World War II pilot in its original 1940s frame was listed on eBay. The listing reads, "This haunted picture holds the energy of an old pilot's ghost." When the haunted picture is set out on display, many people have witnessed a man dressed in uniform appear in hallways and doorways of the house. A deep man's voice can be heard at late hours of the night. I can usually hear military jargon being shouted at fast speed. I don't know why this energy is so attached to this haunted picture, or what this ghost is trying to tell me. Weird. The listing also claimed that only those with the quote-unquote gift would be able to feel the presence. Rightio then. Coming into number 8, we have the World War II wheelchair. This wheelchair is haunted by the ghosts of hundreds of wounded soldiers. Why? Well, the chair was the property of a military hospital during World War II, and it is thought that it contains the spirits of those who sat in it. Sure. Chair owner Neil Packer said that when he sat in the chair, he felt as if his leg had been amputated. Weird. He said that another man's leg went blue after a brief stint in the chair. Another sitter said that she felt like her chest was heavy as if she'd had an infection. The chair was actually taken onto British television too. It featured on This Morning with hosts Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby, and Phil decided to sit in it. Honestly, I feel like if I've learned anything across my 4 years of working on Most Amazing Top 10, it's that you should never sit in the haunted chair. Does anyone remember the Busby stoop chair now chained to the ceiling in Yorkshire? Like, seriously, don't sit in the haunted chairs. But unfortunately, Phil couldn't have listened to me because I made this video after he sat in it, and I don't think he watches the channel, but maybe he should. Nonetheless, he sat in the chair on live TV, and this was his reaction.
The chair?
Yeah.
But
How do you feel?
I feel like...
No, don't be ridiculous. Don't be annoying.
Just joking, this is actually what he said after making that face.
perfectly normal.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
No twinges in your leg?
I have no twinges. I have absolutely nothing going on here whatsoever.
Coming into number 7, we have the pigeon foot. That's not a pigeon sound. Do pigeons make sounds? I don't know. You'll actually find a lot of severed pigeon feet in war museums across the world. Why? Because birds played a very big part in the war. Pigeons were used to send secret messages, but as you can imagine, that brought about a whole new layer of chaos that came from trying to intercept them and stop enemies finding them. One pigeon that failed in its delivery mission was discovered in 2012 in an English chimney in Surrey. David Martin was cleaning his block's chimney and found that one dead bird had a red capsule on its leg. He opened it up and discovered a secret World War II era message written in code. Eventually the code was cracked and the message was discovered to say, "Hit Jerry's right or reserve battery here. Already know electrical engineers headquarters, troops, panzers, batteries, engineers here." Of course, Jerry, I have to say, was the nickname for the Germans, for those of you watching that didn't know. So, vital intel that was never delivered on account of dead pigeon in chimney. Coming into number 6, we have the Trench Raiding Club. War is savage, and that's pretty evident in the existence of this raiding club. Many old weapons were found after the war, and often these clubs were found. Now they're usually made from wood wrapped in sharp pieces of metal, which to me sounds very medieval. Clubs and flails have been used since times of early warfare. While trench clubs were largely used in World War I, some were still found after World War II, and honestly I can't believe in the 20th century we were still whacking each other with spikes on sticks. Although, thinking about that, I maybe would prefer meeting those than some of the other World War II weapons. Although, actually, maybe the sticks. No, brutal. It's brutal. It's all brutal. It's all got very morbid too. I'm imagining being hit with a big stick.
Moving on to number 5 now, we have Heinrich Müller. This was a high-ranking Nazi officer. He was head of the Gestapo secret police and was a trusted colleague of Hitler. Under his leadership, the Gestapo became infamous for their ruthless torture, becoming a textbook example of a police state dictatorship. He was so dedicated to the cause that even when the Russians were about to take Berlin, even when Hitler killed himself, Müller was still seen in uniform working at his desk in the Führer bunker. After the war, nobody knew where he went. There was no real evidence of him being killed or killing himself. He just kind of disappeared off the records. Some say that he was found in a mass grave in a Jewish cemetery, of all places, and that he died soon after he was last publicly seen. The body apparently had documents on it indicating that it was indeed Müller. Others say this was exactly what Müller wanted people to think. A number of other high-ranking Nazis were said to often fake documents and plant them on dead bodies so that after the war they could escape to countries in South America. So, what is the truth? Did he live out a long life in Argentina or Cuba, or did he die along with the Nazi cause? Next up at number 4 now, we have the Blutfahne. This name translates to blood flag. In 1923, Hitler and his Nazi party had no power in Germany. In that year, he organized the Beer Hall Putsch, an attempt to overthrow the German government. It failed, and during the fight, 16 Nazi party members died. After Hitler was released from prison, he was given a flag that had been stained with the blood of his fallen comrades. Thus, the blood flag was born. During the Nazi reign over Germany, Hitler took this Nazi flag all over. He even sanctified other Nazi flags and banners by touching them with the blood flag. The blood flag was last seen in public at an induction ceremony in October 1944, less than a year before the end of World War II. When the war was over and the Nazi party had crumbled, nobody was quite sure anymore where the flag had ended up. Perhaps it's still out there. Next up at number 3 now, we have the Nazi gold train. For decades now, there has been a theory that at the end of the war, the Nazis hid an entire train full of guns, gems, gold, and valuable art in a series of tunnels in a Polish mountain near the town of WWII. The train was passing through when the Russian army began to close in on the area. It's thought the Nazis buried the train underground to stop it from getting into the hands of their enemies. Many doubt the story's authenticity, but others are convinced it's there somewhere. There have been pictures online that are image scans apparently showing tanks underground in the area where people say the train is hidden. At one point, the Polish culture minister himself even said he was 99% sure the train had been found. Despite a number of different digging efforts, the train has never actually been found, but the legend of the hidden treasure still pushes people to look for it. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Battle of Los Angeles. This might sound strange to any of you who study geography because, of course, there were never any battles fought on mainland USA. Well, this story comes from the early days of America's involvement in the war, not long after Pearl Harbor. A few months after that, many people spotted an unidentified object over the sky in LA. Witnesses said the object was round and glowing orange. Naturally, the military response was quick. Searchlights scanned the Californian skies. Anti-aircraft guns fired more than 1,400 shells at this mysterious object. When the guns went silent and the sky was empty, they expected to find wreckage, but nothing was ever found. In 1949, the US Coast Artillery Association claimed that a weather balloon had caused all of the alarm. Then in 1983, the US Office of Air Force History said it was simply due to war nerves. What do you guys think? And finally, number 1 now, we have the British soldiers. In 2009, historians found a strange document at the prisoner of war camp in Auschwitz. It was a list. On it were 17 names. Their surnames included Osborne, Lawrence, Gardiner. The historians said they were the names of Englishmen. Next to 8 of the names were ticks, as if they had been checked off the list for some reason. On the back, written in German, they could make out the words now, never, and since then. It was a total mystery. Why did Auschwitz have this list of English names? Why were only some of them ticked? And what did now, never, and since then even mean? There are a number of theories. The first one that was presented is that these are the names of British prisoners of war, but that didn't really answer the ticks or the words. Another theory that is gaining traction is that this might be a list of British men who had switched sides and were now working for the British SS division or the Nazis.
Starting off our list at number 10, air raids. An air raid in progress. I couldn't even imagine how terrifying this would sound in real life, let alone experience. I remember my grandmother explaining this to me when I was a wee little young tot, and I never forgot it ever since. But as World War II began, these regulations came into play, these new regulations. Like blackout regulations, for example. When there was a blackout, it didn't mean all the power went off. Blackouts are when families would have to cover up all the windows at night to make sure no light escaped, so that no planes flying overhead could see anything. Street lights were also shut off, of course, and if headlights were needed on your car, they had to cover up all of them except for one little slit of light. When enemy planes were seen, these air sirens would sound. At this point, you would make your way to a shelter or be on fire spotting duty. Number 9. Fire engines. So after these explosives were dropped on cities, we needed to of course put them out as quickly as possible. Not only is the fire causing damage to the cities, but also it's illuminating the area, all things we can't have during World War II, of course. So Britain prepared for the worst at this point. They created an auxiliary fire service with over 25,000 members. 18 to 60, that's your job, sorry. September 1940, the Blitz happened. These were the largest fires seen since the Great Fire of 1666. The sounds of a fire engine in the 40s meant that it was already too late. More often than not, these fire service members were working 15-hour shifts, in quite literally the worst conditions in history. Number 8, Spitfires. Moving our attention now to the skies, the sound of Spitfires were one often you didn't forget. Spitfires, or submarine Spitfires, were the most common in terms of fighter planes for World War II. The British single-seater helped bring victory in the Battle of Britain, and during World War II, squadrons of them were based at RAF airfields all over southern England. This was around the time that radar was also first used, so these Spitfires could find their enemy before they even got to their intended target. This is a big deal. The scramble of Spitfires right afterwards meant that a fight was about to go down hundreds of feet in the air, and it sounded something like this. Number 7, the V1. The first of Germany's vengeance weapons. Okay, the only aircraft also to use pulse jet for power, so it's gonna sound different. The V1 flying bomb was an early version of a cruise missile. These were deployed for the London. They were first developed at Peenemünde Army Research Center back in 1939. YouTube won't let me say it, but the Yazis call this the cherry stone. The Yazis, the other guys, I'm not gonna say them. The first was launched at London on June 13th, 1944. These missiles were fired from facilities along the French and Dutch coasts. And yes, you definitely would have heard them pass. Or worse, approach. Number 6, the Katyusha. The Katyusha multiple rocket launcher sounds intimidating by that name alone. It was first built in the Soviet Union during World War II. It was the first mass-produced self-propelled rocket artillery. Now, of course, this sounded haunting. It was loud. They didn't have that great of an accuracy, but with multiple rockets launching all at the same time within 10 seconds apart, it didn't really make a difference if they were close or not. It's doomed. The downside was that these behemoths took a while to reload. Between 1941 and 1945, the Soviet Union produced around 10,000 of these multiple rocket launchers. At first, these weapons were designed to be fired from warplanes, not vehicles. That's any indication on how loud they go.
Coming into number 5, we have the trumpets that started the war. These scary wartime objects were actually from an ancient period in history. In 1922, King Tutankhamun's tomb was opened. Now, this was a period between the First and Second War. A lot of people were very nervous about the whole thing, and perhaps for good reason, as this is where the legends of the Curse of the Pharaoh began. Among the artifacts, silver, wooden and bronze trumpets were found. Now, the trumpets were played and recorded in 1939 on British radio, the BBC. A few months after it was broadcasted, World War II broke out, and the announcement was delivered to the British public on the same radio station. This has led many to believe that the trumpets are cursed and actually have the power to summon war. This is one of the only instances where I would ever be like, do not play the trumpets. Usually I wholeheartedly encourage trumpet playing. I love trumpets, they're great, but war trumpets are bad. Yes, they are. Coming into number 4, we have the lost bombs, and the found bombs, but mostly the lost bombs are the concern. So a lot of worrying undetonated bombs have been found since World War II. Just last year, 1,000 people were evacuated from their homes in Cologne in Germany when a World War II bomb was discovered near a petrol station in the city, which doesn't sound like a great combination. That wasn't even the worst of it. In 2011, 45,000 people were forced to evacuate their homes when a drought revealed a big unexploded bomb in the Rhine near Koblenz. The scary fact is that thousands of unexploded bombs are still sitting hidden and buried across Europe. Do you want to hear a scary statistic? 70 years later, more than 2,000 tons of unexploded munitions are uncovered on German soil every year. Terrifying. Sadly, coming into number 3, we have the body parts. It wasn't just the Nazis mutating their enemies, a lot of countries were at it. It seems that actually a vast amount of Americans who took part in World War II and were stationed in the Pacific would wear Japanese body parts as trophies, which is disgusting. Luckily, the majority of these have been destroyed, but necklaces made of Japanese teeth were fashioned. Ears were pinned to military belts, and it is even said that Franklin Roosevelt, the President of the United States, was given the gift of a letter opener made out of a Japanese soldier's arm. A bunch of trophy skulls were found after the war. Skulls of dead Japanese people were given to Americans as gifts. Here's a picture of a woman that appeared in a magazine in 1944 that shows her writing to her sweetheart to thank him for the skull. Honestly, I can think of more romantic gifts, but like, whatever. Actually, not whatever. Judging you. Skulls. Gross. Stick to flowers, please. Coming into number 2, I do love a ghost ship. We have the Queen Mary. So the Queen Mary is more than just a haunted object. It's a haunted object filled with hundreds of other haunted objects and floating. When World War II began, British ship the Queen Mary was converted into a transportation ship for Allied troops. She transported 800,000 troops to Europe in her time. Unfortunately though, she was involved in an accident which killed 239 people. The Queen Mary was retired in 1967 after another stint as an ocean liner. She is now a permanently docked hotel in Long Beach, California, but it is said that she is mercilessly haunted by a number of souls. It seems the swimming pool is haunted by the spirit of a young girl. A first-class passenger, dubbed the Woman in White, glides across the floor of the Queen's salon in a long dancing gown. The ship has had to retire the use of room B340 because there have been so many complaints of its haunting. Those who have been on the ship tend to report ghostly goings on, and they have done for decades. Ever since the ship was a working transport ship, people have been spotting ghosts. Scary, but I do love a ghost boat. I don't love this at number 1 though. This is absolutely horrifying. I only learnt about this today. I am talking about the blood flag. The blood flag, or the Blutfahne, was a Nazi swastika flag that was regularly carried during the Third Reich, and it served as a ceremony piece for the party. The flag was the original carried in Hitler's failed Munich beer hall putsch in November 1923. It was soaked in the blood of an SA member who was killed in the attack. The flag was then saved and had the names of 16 people who died in the putsch sewn in. The flag was kept at Nazi HQ in Munich, but was taken out for ceremonies in which other flags were bought to touch it in order to consecrate them. It is said that the blood flag touched all of the banners in the Nuremberg rallies. The blood flag, interestingly, hasn't been seen since the end of the war. Nobody knows where it went. Creepy. So guys, that was the top 10 scary World War II objects for you. Before I read comments, I want to introduce you to one more object that I couldn't find a way to fit into my list. Meet this chap. It's Rupert. He's a lost Rupert. He's Rupert to me anyway. British troops called him Rupert and the Americans called him Oscar. This is an Allied used dummy. They would use paratrooper dummies to cause confusion and chaos amongst German troops, so they would drop these Ruperts or Oscars onto land and then Germans would be like, go get them, but no. Just a dummy.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have Anne Frank. I'm sure you've all heard of the name. The young Jewish girl who wrote a diary of her family hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam for 2 years. On August 4th, 1944, her family and their friends were found in their hiding place by the Gestapo police, arrested and sent to concentration camps where all except Anne's father ended up dying. It's a tragic story that always brings up one question. How did the police know where to find them? They didn't know to look there for 2 years, and then apparently they received an anonymous call. Nobody knows who made that call though. Some say it was a man called Tony Allers, a friend of Anne's father, who was a hateful, abusive man that knew that they went into hiding. Others say it was one of the workers in the warehouse below their hiding spot. Historians can never know for sure who it was, only that person knew for sure, and they surely knew what they were doing. Moving on to number 9 now, we have the Foo Fighters. You guys might be thinking of the famous band for this one. Well, this is where they get their name from, and it's a very interesting story. Towards the end of World War II, Allied pilots began reporting seeing strange things in the skies over Europe. Crafts that glowed and darted through the air at insane speeds, easily 200 miles an hour plus. The pilots couldn't keep up with the lights as they made sharp turns that would be impossible even with today's technology. They dubbed them Foo Fighters. They were red, orange or green, sometimes appearing in formations of up to 10. They never showed up on radar. Naturally, in the years since then, many conspiracy theorists have said it's UFOs. UFOs, alien crafts from another world. Others have said perhaps they are time travelers coming back to witness the end of this historic war. Another more credible theory is that they were secret Nazi crafts using advanced technology, all destroyed before the end of the war. Others say it was likely a natural trick of the light phenomena, such as St. Elmo's fire. When it comes to Foo Fighters, the more you dig, the more questions there are. Next up at number 8 now, we have Dead Man Floating. On April 30th, 1943, a fisherman picked up a body off the coast of Spain. It appeared to be a British soldier. Spain was neutral but leant towards the Axis, so they handed the body over to the Nazis. They examined the body and found papers saying it was Major Martin of the British Army. Among the documents were plans detailing the British were planning to attack Nazi-occupied Greece. Hitler then sent entire divisions to defend Greece. You can only imagine how surprised they were then when the British didn't attack Greece at all and instead went for the now less defended Sicily. That's because Major Martin wasn't real. The British had dressed up a body as a fake Marine with fake plans on him, knowing it would fall into the hands of the Nazis. They intended to attack Sicily all along but needed a way to draw the Nazi defences away from it. It's an incredible story, but one question that has arisen is who did the body actually belong to? There are no official British records, only theories. Some think it was a British soldier called Tom Martin who had recently died when his aircraft carrier sank. Others say it was actually a man called Glyndwr Michael, a mentally ill, homeless Welshman who had died after eating rat poison. Others say this couldn't be possible because the Nazis needed to believe this was a fit and healthy Marine who died at sea, not a sick, unfit man who died to rat poison. So, who really was Major Tom, the body that helped so much? Next up at number 7 now, we have the ghost plane of Pearl Harbor. This one is just straight up weird and very paranormal. On December 8th, 1942, nearly a year to the day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, a single unidentified plane was picked up by American radar heading towards Pearl Harbor from the direction of Japan. US planes were scrambled out to investigate. When they pulled up alongside it, they saw it was a Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, an American plane that had been used to defend Pearl Harbor the year before but had never been used since. They say the plane was riddled with bullet holes and that the pilot could be seen inside, bloody and slumped over the cockpit. They said at one point he briefly waved at the other planes just before crash landing. Search teams went through the wreckage, but to their amazement they found no body inside, just a diary claimed that the plane had flown from Mindanao, an island over 1,300 miles away. Very strange. I'm not even sure what to make of that one. Coming at number 6 now, we have the Bell. Legend says that during the war, the Nazis created a weapon known simply as Die Glock. That's German for the Bell. The project was codenamed Project Kronos and was given the highest classification. The giant metallic bell was said to be 2.7 meters wide and 4 meters high. The exact material it was made of is said to be unknown. Apparently, it contained 2 counter-rotating cylinders that held a metallic liquid known as Zerum 525. Now, through some unknown process, the bell's mechanism had an effect zone of 200 meters. Anything living in this zone was said to be in danger. When it was activated, crystals would form in animal tissue, blood would coagulate and separate, plants would rapidly die and decompose. Some say the scientists who made it often died horribly during tests. The bell was also able to rise off the ground and hover in the air. Of course, even if it did exist, it was never used out in the open. The question then remains, is the bell still out there? And if so, where?
In our number 6 spot today, we have the fire cart bell. This is a bell that comes from the Japanese city of Aomori, which was by American B-29 bombers who flew in from the Mariana Islands. This took place on June 28th of 1945, and the explosives were M74 napalm-filled bombs. Those in the city had only hand-pulled carts with water pumps to fight the fires, which of course soon left them ravaging the mostly wooden city, completely out of control. This led to 1,700 Japanese residents losing their lives and the destruction of 18,000 homes. Seaman First Class Robert McClintock from Seattle, Washington was assigned to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey in 1945, and he helped with the report for the city. This meant that after the attacks and the surrender of Japan, he was one of the first in the city. Through his work, he ended up getting along so well with those who lived in the city that they presented him with one of the bells from their carts as a symbol of kindness between the Japanese and the Americans. These bells were used to call the residents out into the streets to help fight the fires and try and save the city, which we of course know unfortunately didn't work. This bell, while in some ways is a symbol of peace, is also a symbol of the entire campaign, which was extremely deadly. It reminds us of the human side to everything that went on during this era and time, as it sometimes can be forgotten. We have the Norden sight. If you don't know, a bomb sight is what is used in military aircrafts in order to be able to drop accurately. The Norden site was one that existed during the World War II era, and it is said to have been a highly sought after piece of technology. In fact, it was apparently so top secret that those in the aircrafts with them had to swear an oath to protect the secrets of the device by destroying it before it could fall into the hands of the enemy, even if it meant sacrificing their own lives. That is next level secrecy. The reason is because it was claimed that this site had the ability to place a bomb in a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet away. Not only is that a strangely specific example, but it was also greatly exaggerated. In reality, the piece of technology was a pretty complicated machine that consisted of a ton of gear wheels and ball bearings, but the major flaw of it is that when out of proper calibration, it was likely to create inaccuracies. This is of course a huge problem when it comes to something like and the machine could fall out of calibration through something common like the turbulence of the aircraft on the journey. Certainly not foolproof by any means. In our number 4 spot today we have My Gal Sal. My Gal Sal is a B-17, which is a strategic bomber that was developed in the 1930s. In fact, My Gal Sal was one of the first of thousands of B-17s to fly the northern air route from the United States to England. This plane specifically has its own special story attached to it though, as on June 27, 1942, due to terrible weather conditions, this B-17 plane had to make an emergency landing on an ice cap in Greenland. Of course, this is a less than ideal location, especially for the crew that was on board. Somehow the crew was able to survive the whole ordeal that ended up lasting 10 days. They had to find a way to get the aircraft's radio working again as it was broken, and they finally managed to do it and get an SOS signal sent through, which is of course what thankfully led to their rescue. The plane, however, did not have the same fate for quite some while. I can't imagine it's exactly easy to recover a plane from anywhere, let alone an ice cap, so My Gal Sal sat in this location for 50 years. Eventually, however, they did recover it and restore it before it made its way to its new home in the museum. Thankfully, this is one story on our list that doesn't have a horrifying ending, but it is definitely still an artifact that reminds us all of that scary time for those on board the plane My Gal Sal. In our number 3 spot today we have a letter. This letter is one that was written by Bernard Madison Hurd on December 16th, 1943, and it was a letter sent to his parents who were in New Orleans, Louisiana. The letter starts off how you'd expect. He gives his parents an update on where he is, and he explains that his next duty station is in the submarine, the USS Tilefish, which he calls, quote, a real beauty. He talks about receiving a letter from his brother, who was also in the Navy. He talks about enjoying spending time with his mother while on his leave, and he wished his father a speedy recovery from an illness. This is all what you'd expect a letter to contain, and it really captures a moment in time for Bernard. And while this letter does exactly that, it also doesn't even come close to letting you know exactly who Bernard is. He was a career Navy man who enlisted in 1940 and remained on active duty until the mid-1950s. He served on plenty of ships and was an elite combat veteran, but he wasn't like the other sailors of his time. Bernard was a black man, and he was confined to service in the steward's branch. Because of racism and segregation, Bernard was limited to his seagoing domestic role and had to clean up after other officers, serve their food, and was basically at their beck and call. This wasn't much different than the society he had left behind. This letter doesn't tell us any of that, however. The letter simply tells us of a man who missed his family. The letter captures one single moment of Bernard's incredible, long, and storied service to the country that didn't treat him fairly. This certainly isn't the most terrifying artifact on this list, but it certainly is one of the most important. In our number 2 spot today we have Michael McShane's life jacket. In 1939, Michael McShane was headed out to his home of Ireland from Detroit, Michigan in order to collect his winnings from a sweepstakes that was designed to help fund hospitals. On his return trip back to America, he was booked on the SS Athena, which departed from Glasgow, Scotland on September 1st, 1939. In August of that same year, Europe was moving closer and closer to war, and this meant that people were desperate to get out. Because of this, the Donaldson line did everything they could to get as many passengers as possible onto the SS Athena. They were putting 4 people into 2-person rooms, and places like the lounges and libraries were being turned into bunk rooms. The boat was packed, but people were fleeing. Once the boat set out to sea after traveling just 1,600 yards, the first spread of torpedoes were fired in the Battle of the Atlantic, and one single torpedo struck the side of the SS Athena just as Michael McShane and the rest of the passengers were sitting down for dinner. The explosion immediately destroyed the engine and fire room, which took the life of almost every man who was on the station. It also destroyed the staircase to the third-class dining room, which ended up proving to be fatal for many of the passengers eating their dinner. The passengers who weren't immediately harmed sprung into action and went to retrieve their life jackets, including Michael, who was then put aboard lifeboat 14A. This story has so much more to it that unfortunately I don't have time to cover, but it is certainly worth reading about. But to make this long story short, in the end, lifeboat 14A was the first of 4 that was rescued. Out of the 1,418 civilians and sailors aboard that ship that day, 112 were lost during the sinking and the rescue, but Michael managed to survive. For the rest of his life, he kept the life jacket he had worn that day, and after his death, his family donated it to the National World War II Museum. The jacket not only reminds us of his survival, but it is also a relic that was there for the very first shots of the Battle of the Atlantic, which was a critical part of the war. It's a link to Michael and also to the beginning of the Second World War. In our number 1 spot today, we have an MG42. There is no type of machine gun that is not terrifying, but this one managed to earn itself the nickname of Bone Saw, so I think it's pretty safe to say that this one is a little extra terrifying. According to the National World War II Museum website, this thing had the capacity to shoot out 1,550 rounds of high-velocity 7.92mm ammunition per minute, which works out to be about 25 rounds a second. This horrifying weapon quite literally has the ability to basically cut someone in half, and of course it left soldiers frozen in fear. So much so that the War Department actually created a training video to prepare soldiers and help combat the psychological effects that the MG42 had. Unfortunately, this training video failed to show soldiers preparing for combat the full scope of just how dangerous this thing was. The video stated that while the MG42 was powerful, it was also inaccurate, which is not true. There weren't struggles with the accuracy, but what was an issue was the large quantities of ammunition used, as well as its tendency to overheat. These issues caused the German forces to totally restructure how they did things, including having about 6 extra barrels on hand, so when one overheats, it could quickly be replaced to cool off. One example of an MG42 resides in the National World War II Museum collection, and it was recovered from the battlefield by an army trucker named Private First Class Leonard Liniewski. The weapon actually stayed with him and his family until 2016, when his son Marty donated it to the museum.
Starting off this countdown, we have the gas attack. Just before the end of World War I, sound recordist William Gaisberg decided to take his recording equipment to the Western Front in order to capture the sounds of war. He managed to capture a gas shell bombardment. So what you're hearing is the British artillery shelling German lines with poison gas. You hear an explosive blasting out of a compressed air chamber. That's what the bang and then the wheezing sound is. In the canisters were the toxic gases. Within weeks of this recording, William got sick and passed away. They blamed it on the Spanish flu, but it might have been due to the fact that he was exposed to the toxic gas. On top of that, most of the men involved in this attack died from the gas exposure as well. In our 9th spot, we have the Battle of Kwajalein. This recording captures the US Marines fighting Japanese troops during the Battle of Kwajalein in 1944. It was recorded by Fred Welker and Keane Hepburn. You can hear actual gunshots and fires in this recording as the narrator records firsthand what he is witnessing.
Can you hear that sound? Those, my friends, are bullets.
Imagine being in his shoes, witnessing this battle firsthand, having bullets whiz around you. Eventually, it gets really dark.
A lot of fire, but they're going in. They're not stopping for anything.
You hear that? He says, "There's a lot of fire, but the soldiers are still going in." He continued on saying, and I quote, "Our boys are running across. Haven't seen any of them come back yet. Perhaps a few casualties." Must have been horrifying to experience. In our 8th spot, we have the Lancaster bombing raid. On the night of September 3rd, 1943, a Lancaster bomber headed out to bomb Berlin. On board the plane was BBC journalist Winford Vaught Thomas and sound engineer Reg Pidsley. They didn't have a guarantee that they would return, but they were determined to record the bombing firsthand. The next night, it was broadcast on British radio.
Steady. 25. Bombs away. There goes the cookie. Lucky.
Oh, we got lucky going over there.
What's even crazier is that BBC recreated the Lancaster bomber plane and used this recording to make a VR immersive experience. You're seated in a plane and you can look all around you as you witness the bombing firsthand. Apparently, this has been called the most beautiful, horrible sight ever seen. Moving on to number 7, we have the Battle of Palalu. This is an audio recording of John Cooper, an NBC war correspondent. He is reporting from a US Navy cruiser during the Battle of Palalu on September 22nd, 1944.
Now general quarters has just sounded. The crew is running to their battle stations, and in just 2 minutes we will start firing. We will start the final bombardment of the beaches before the troops go in.
I can't imagine staying that calm watching the horror of war unfold right in front of me.
The men are out on the beach and have gone forward through that fringe of trees into the interior. Although I've seen several splashes, I have not seen any boat hit or sunk.
Like, he literally said there's a warship behind him firing at them, yet he remains calm and manages to keep reporting. What a brave man. Moving on to number 6, we have the secret speech. In November of 1939, a Swiss journal published a speech that was apparently delivered by Joseph Stalin in secret, although he denied these claims. The speech was apparently delivered to members of the Politburo, and he told them how they could benefit with their friendship with Nazi Germany. And he shared and justified his strategy to promote military conflict in Europe. As I said, this speech was delivered in secret, so I don't have a recording of it, but I do have a transcript from the reconstruction of the speech.
Comrades, it is in the interest of the USSR, the workers' homeland, that a war breaks out between the Reich and the capitalist Anglo-French bloc. It is imperative that we agree to conclude the pact proposed by Germany, and then work in such a way that this war, once it is declared, will be prolonged maximally. We must strengthen our economic and propaganda work in the belligerent countries.
Of course, there is much debate on this speech. Did he actually deliver it? Well, Soviet Special Archives suggest that he did.
Number 5. Dive planes. Junkers Ju-87 or Stuka were German dive planes designed by Hermann Pohlmann. The first time one of these nightmares took flight was back in 1935. They made their first debut in combat come 1937. That's when the German Air Force used them during the Spanish Civil War, as well as the Axis forces during World War II. The Yazidis designed these planes so that they would emit a loud noise. They made it loud on purpose. They referred to it as the Jericho trumpet. They were designed to weaken the enemy and scare them. And in doing so, the aerodynamics slowed the planes down by 20 miles per hour. So eventually, the sirens were pulled off. Number 4. Bats. You would never think of bats as an unsettling World War II sound, but get ready, here we go. Bat bombs were an experimental weapon developed in World War II, which was exactly as it sounds. The idea was bats with incendiary devices attached to them, and they would swoop in behind enemy lines and decimate the enemy. A man by the name of Lytle S. Adams, a dentist named Lytle, believe it or not, was behind this entire idea. A dentist from Pennsylvania. Who'da thunk? The 60-year-old was driving home from vacation when suddenly he witnessed thousands of bats exit the Carlsbad Caves, and then he also heard about Pearl Harbor and he began to brainstorm at this moment. These tiny flying mammals could be connected to tiny time-fused incendiary bombs and then released to land on the enemy. This was just 2 months after Pearl Harbor, and then he presented the idea to the White House and the project was approved. However, it was later abandoned in 1943 due to the development of nuclear bombs. Number 3. Reindeers. Yeah, you didn't think bats were the only animal weirdly involved in World War II, did you? Let's do it. June 1941, the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union, and it was one of the biggest attacks in history. Britain and US had to send weapons, supplies, anything really, just to keep them afloat, just to keep them in the fight. They sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle. That was the only route, but of course it was littered with U-boats. Thankfully, the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn the Soviets were able to fight on. So as a gift, as a thank you, the Soviets sent the captain of the Trident, the World War II submarine, a gift. What would you send a gift to someone like this? Well, they sent them a live reindeer. They sent him a reindeer, like he's Santa Claus. The British had to accept it because it was ill-mannered if they didn't, so they had to keep now a 6-foot-tall, real-life reindeer on a submarine. Her name was Pollyanna. They brought her on board through a torpedo tube. How sad is this? She was a crew member for 6 weeks also. This wasn't like 1 or 2 weeks where they're like, okay, can we like get rid of this thing? Like the thing's over. 6 weeks. That's a lot of business days. That's so many business days. She slept better than most, believe it or not. She actually shared a room in the captain's quarters. Finally, the Trident returned home to Britain and our leading lady was donated to the Regent's Park Zoo. She's probably like, thank God, I hated that. Mayor's had to pop for so long. Number 2, Operation Gunnerside. This next one should be a movie. It's already a movie. Damn, okay. We've talked about horrible sounds now that we connect to world events, like the Blitz, for example. But what if one of the most daring operations from World War II barely had any sound at all? What if nobody even knew what was going on? What if nobody even knew what was happening? What if the most unsettling sound you heard were the sound of skis clacking together? Could that ever be a possibility? Skis? Could skis be haunting? Well, it depends who you ask. In the early 40s, Germany took over a factory in Telemark so they could make plutonium. Now, originally the Allies sent 30 British Army officers, but they couldn't make it due to weather conditions. So next, they sent 11 Norwegians with skis. Norwegians, ski-gens. I tried, we try here. The Norwegians snuck down the 660-foot ice gorge. They snuck in, laid a bunch of explosives, waited for their hostage to find his glasses. I'm not making that up. He was a Norwegian caretaker. They let him go after. 0 casualties also this entire mission, might I remind you. And then they left on skis. The Heroes of Telemark, starring Kirk Douglas. This is a real movie. Check it out if you want to see what I just described in live action. Yeah, it gave us a little break on our dark history here. And finally, number 1, interrogations. Hans Scharf, who has since been dubbed the Master Interrogator, was living in South Africa with his family, but when he was visiting Germany, that's when the war broke out. So of course he was drafted, but his wife convinced a general not to put him on the front lines, but instead with interpreters. After a handful of mistakes and wild coincidences, Hans became the lead interrogator for the Allied pilots felt in France and Germany. His methods of interrogation, though, changed history, and I had to include it on this list. Usually interrogations are harsh. It's a lot of pressure verbally and then also physically. For example, when he was younger, he witnessed a prisoner get abused. And so from that day on, he vowed to never do the same. It was so bad that it changed his thought process. So his interrogation methods revolve now around using kindness and friendly banter. His method has been studied since and turns out scientifically, yeah, this works better. This way, whoever's on the other side of said interrogation leaks more information, and nobody has to break a digit this time around. Once the war was finally over, Scharf testified against Germans, moved to the States, and began a new career as a mosaic artist. If you want to see his work currently on display, you gotta head to Silorenda's Castle in Disney World. No, I'm not joking. He did that.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the SS Wallenbar II. Quite recently, just a few years ago, just off of the east coast of Australia, the wreckage of the ship was discovered. This ship sank in 1943 during the war after being struck by 2 torpedoes sent from a Japanese submarine. The ship sank in just minutes, with only 5 crew members surviving and the rest of the 32 on board sadly losing their lives. The acting minister for veterans at the time, Jeff Lee, said, quote, "This secret has been hidden at the bottom of the deep sea for decades, and this find will give some closure for the descendants and relatives of the 32 people who lost their lives." Another interesting fact about the sinking of this ship is that when it went down, it was carrying boxes of butter and bacon, which then went on to be washed up on the shores. This led to a huge influx of cake baking, which in this time was normally restricted because of the food rationing. In our number 9 spot today, we have a German bomb. This is one discovery that was definitely found accidentally. In August of 2015, construction workers in East London found something that I don't think anyone was expecting when they unearthed an unexploded 500-pound German bomb from World War II that, if detonated, could easily destroy the surrounding homes and buildings. Yeah, not terrifying at all, right? Of course, this site was immediately blocked off and 700 people ended up being evacuated until things could return to normal safely. The British Army's Royal Logistics Corps Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit took 24 terrifying hours to make this device safe, which thankfully they were able to do without incident. It is thought that there are likely many more of these scary undetonated bombs around because they are the result of bombs that were dropped but failed to go off. Some didn't go off and won't ever because they were made in error, but most of them just had simple technical difficulties that now, if mishandled, could cause the bomb to detonate. It's all terrifying, but thankfully this one didn't go on to do any harm. In our number 8 spot today, we have the USS Lexington. In 2018, researchers were able to locate the wreckage of the USS Lexington, which was a US Air aircraft carrier that was used in the Second World War. This discovery came at the bottom of the Coral Sea, about 800 kilometers off of the coast of eastern Australia. It is said that the Lexington is one of the capital ships that were lost during the war. It was originally commissioned as a battle cruiser, but in 1925 it was instead launched as an aircraft carrier. From May 4th to May 8th, 1942, this ship and the USS Yorktown faced off against 3 Japanese carriers in the Battle of the Coral Sea. While both the Lexington and the Yorktown put up a great fight, on May 8th the Lexington ended up being damaged when it was hit by multiple torpedoes and bombs. This was already bad, but things got much worse when a secondary explosion led to raging fires, which then led to the crew abandoning ship. On the evening of May 8th, in order to prevent the ship from being captured, it was scuttled or deliberately sunk by the USS Phelps, but not until the surviving 2,770 crew members and officers were rescued. Sadly, this was not every member, however, as it is said that 216 people lost their lives in this battle. In our number 7 spot today, we have the USS Nevada. This ship for many years was deemed unsinkable, but after a long resume of battle, that unfortunately wasn't the case. The USS Nevada during the 1941 surprise attack on Pearl Harbor was the only ship to get away in one piece, albeit barely. It took years to repair the ship, but once done, she was returned to battle in 1944 to support the Normandy invasion, and a year after that, it assisted in 2 more invasions and 2 atomic bomb tests. After the war ended, they finally decided that, hey, this gal's seen enough, and they decided to retire her, but not before using her as target practice. It took a lot of ammo and 5 days to do it, but they finally sank the ship with a torpedo being the final strike. After the sinking, the Navy wasn't exactly sure where it would end up. I mean, it was over 15,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, so it really could have gone anywhere. Cut all the way to 2020 during an expedition by Ocean Infinity and Search Inc., and the ship was finally, once again, located. She ended up just 65 nautical miles southwest of Pearl Harbor. In our number 6 spot today, we have the aircraft wreck. In 2017, divers discovered not only the remains of a wreck of an American B-24, the Tulsa America bomber that was downed just off of the shores of Croatia in 1944, but inside of the wreck they also found the remains of those who lost their lives in the incident. This is one of many aircrafts, mostly bombers like this one, that were downed in the area, and that is because of the fact that there was an important Allied airbase there. The wreck was found resting on the seabed about 40 meters down, and there were bones discovered inside which are said to belong to the pilot and co-pilot of the aircraft. They were able to find them by sifting through the sediment underneath the cabin, and their remains were then placed into bags in order to be lifted out of the water and brought to the ship for further analysis. This is most certainly quite a grim discovery, but it allows those who lost their lives to be returned home, and it allows the relatives some sort of closure with their tragic losses.
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Operation Upshot Knothole. Operation Upshot Knothole was a series of 11 nuclear tests done by the US military in a Nevada test site. It's believed that around 21,000 soldiers took part in training during these tests. This was all done to try and prepare the military for atomic war. In fact, this was the first time a nuclear artillery shell was ever tested. This recording is from 1953 from the Nevada test site. It's one of the few publicly available recordings of a nuclear explosion. As I said, there were a total of 11 nuclear tests done by the US military. 3 airdrops, 7 tower tests, and 1 airburst. This was the recording of the airburst. In our 4th spot, we have the surrender of Japan. Following the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, Japan's Emperor Hirohito made a broadcast saying that they were going to surrender. This was the very first time that the Japanese emperor addressed his subjects in such manner. So the recording was broadcast on August 15th, 1945, but was actually recorded a day earlier. Microphones were set up in an office bunker under the Imperial Household Ministry where the emperor recorded his speech. It was then played on a phonograph record and broadcast for all to hear. But the Imperial Japanese Army was extremely opposed to the idea of surrendering. They found it dishonorable. So 1,000 or more officers and soldiers raided the Imperial Palace to try and destroy the recording or prevent the recording from happening. In fact, some Japanese generals tried to kidnap the emperor to keep the war going, which failed, and the emperor still managed to sneak the recording out and give it to broadcasters.
米英蘇四国に対しその共同宣言を
After this broadcast, a number of Japanese Army and Navy officers took their lives. They said they'd rather die than surrender. Coming in at number 3, we have D-Day. This next recording was taken from the Battle of Normandy. The battle began on June 6, 1944, also known as D-Day. This was the largest naval air and land operation in history. But as many of you know, D-Day was a very bloody battle. The first wave of troops that landed suffered terrible losses. In particular, the US troops at Omaha Beach and the Canadians at Juno Beach. This recording was taken on D-Day at Sword Beach by English presenter Alan Melville.
Hello everyone, this is Alan Melville speaking from the beach just west of the little village of Ouistreham. The paratroops are landing. They're landing all around me as I speak. They've come in from the sea and they're fluttering down, red, white and blue parachutes fluttering down, and they're just about the best thing that we've seen for a good many hours.
It's very scary how you can hear the gunfires going off in the background. Just imagine what Alan was seeing as he was recording this. Again, it's insane to me how all these recorders managed to stay calm.
I can still see the signs of a typical Panther battle. You can hear the aircraft roaring over me, I expect, as I speak.
Moving on to number 2, we have Adolf Hitler. This is the only known recording of Hitler speaking in an unofficial tone. It was taken in 1942 when he visited Finland under extreme secrecy. The purpose of this trip was to wish Field Marshal Karl Mannerheim on his 75th birthday. He was also invited for a private meal on board of Mannerheim's train to talk about negotiations. What he didn't know is that the train had a microphone placed there by Thor Damon, a sound engineer. He managed to capture the first 11 minutes of their private conversation without the dictator's knowledge.
Wir wussten das selber auch nicht so ganz genau, wie ungeheuerlich diese Startabrüstung war.
Like I said, this is the only recording of him in which we hear him talking casually without authority in his voice. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Operation Wandering Soul, otherwise known as Ghost Tape number 10, and it is just as eerie as its name is. This recording was played loud on speakers outside of US bases during the Vietnam War. The main goal was to scare away and taunt the enemies. The tape starts off playing funeral music, and then you can hear a bunch of ghosts wailing. Then you can hear other eerie voices. So basically, the young voice wants their daddy to come home, and then the dad replies saying that his body is gone and that he is dead. It is a Vietnamese belief that if the dead aren't buried in their homeland, then their souls will wander around in pain and suffering. So this tape was supposed to be the voices of their dead comrades wandering around. Like I said, this was blasted to try and scare and discourage enemies.